Hello, this is a continuation of Chapter 28 on the male reproductive system, and I'm just going to go over a recap a little bit of what we talked about last time. We talked about three processes in the male reproductive tract. We talked about spermatogenesis, and in spermatogenesis we talked about how a spermatogonium becomes a spermatid. This process begins at puberty in the male. So at puberty, a male has an increased secretion and release of testosterone, and testosterone stimulates this process of spermatogenesis. It also requires the hormone follicle-stimulating hormone. The follicle-stimulating hormone stimulates the nurse cell. As well as the process of spermatogenesis. Luteinizing hormone is another hormone that the male needs for this process to begin in puberty, and luteinizing hormone stimulates the production of testosterone. So the male needs testosterone and FSH, and LH is required to stimulate the synthesis and release of testosterone. Spermatogenesis had three phases to it: mitosis, and in mitosis the spermatogonium became the primary spermatocyte. Then meiosis 1, where the primary spermatocyte became a secondary spermatocyte. So each spermatogonium, so one spermatogonium becomes two primary spermatocytes, and then each of the two primary spermatocytes become a secondary spermatocyte. So then we end up with 4 of these secondary spermatocytes. Now during this phase of meiosis 1, this is when we had the tetrad formation through the process called a synapse. And in this process there was crossing over of genetic material, and that ensured that each of the final secondary spermatocytes would not be identical in DNA. Then there was meiosis 2. In meiosis 2, the secondary spermatocytes became spermatids. So the second process that we have then is called spermiogenesis. In spermiogenesis, these spermatids start to develop the characteristics of a sperm, and we call that sperm a spermatozoa. We're going to take a look on the next slide and see all the parts of a spermatozoa. So that's spermiogenesis. The spermatozoa are still lodged in the cytoplasm of the nurse cell. So the spermatozoa need to be released. They need to be unlodged from that nurse cell so they can enter into the lumen of the seminiferous tubule. And that process is called spermiation. Spermiation is where the spermatozoa are unlodged from the nurse cell. Now they're in the lumen of the seminiferous tubule. And they will be transported to the rete testis. And from there, they'll be transported to the gland called the epididymis. Let's take a look at the spermatozoon. So a spermatozoon, that's singular, that's a single sperm, whereas the spermatozoa, that's plural. So first we look at the anatomy of the sperm. The sperm has a head, then it has a middle portion, and then it has a tail. So the head is a flattened ellipsoid structure that contains the nucleus, which contains the chromosomes. So remember, there will be 23 chromosomes in the head of the sperm. This is a sex cell. It's not a somatic cell, it's a sex cell. The sex cells are the only cells that have only 23 chromosomes and not 23 pairs of chromosomes. The middle piece contains mitochondria. Mitochondria are going to make the ATP that will help the tail to move and make the sperm motile. So the tail is the flagella. So there are many types of cells out in the environment called bacteria that have flagella, but in the human body, the sperm is the only cell that has a flagella. So the sperm have to absorb a fructose, which is a nutrient. It's a sugar, a simple sugar. The cell absorbs the fructose and then makes ATP with it. So this spermatozoon that has been produced in the testes and then moved into the epididymis is physically mature, but it can't fertilize a female's oocyte yet. Other parts of the reproductive system will cause the functional maturation of this sperm and will help it to nourish and store and transport this sperm. So even though it's been released from that testis, from the seminiferous tubule, it still doesn't have the ability to fertilize. So the sperm has to mature. And at this point, when it's been released into the lumen of the seminiferous tubule, it's not capable of locomotion, which means it's immotile, it's not moving. It will be moved into the epididymis by cilia. So cilia cause a movement and will push that spermatozoon into the epididymis. So now we're going to talk about all of the glands of the male reproductive tract and how they help this sperm to become motile and to help it to become functionally mature. Once the spermatozoon leaves the epididymis, it enters into the ductus deferens. The ductus deferens is a tube that's about 16 to 18 inches long. It begins at the tail of the epididymis, and it ascends through the inguinal canal and goes around the urinary bladder, and it pierces through the prostate gland. And where it pierces through the prostate gland, it is called the ejaculatory duct. Then the ejaculatory duct will empty into the urethra. So if we looked at a drawing here, so here's the testis, here's the epididymis on top, and from the epididymis is this ductus deferens. It wraps around the urinary bladder. It's going to come through this gland that we call the prostate gland. And it goes through the prostate gland that portion of the ductus deferens then is called the ejaculatory duct. And as the ejaculatory duct exits the prostate gland, which is right here, then it becomes known as the urethra. So the sperm are produced in the testis. So this is where they're produced. Then they mature in the epididymis, and then they move into the ductus deferens, and they're still immotile, and they're going to move through the ductus deferens. It used to be called the vas deferens. And as it moves through this ductus deferens, there are other glands that are going to secrete into this ductus deferens. These glands are called accessory glands. The accessory glands produce semen. Semen is a mixture of secretions from many glands. There are important glands that include the seminal glands and the prostate gland, and the bulbourethral gland. The seminal glands produce about 60% of semen. It has a high concentration of fructose. Fructose is used by the sperm to produce ATP, which is needed for the flagella to move. The seminal fluid is slightly alkaline, so that helps to neutralize acids from both the prostate gland and in the vagina. And it initiates the first step in capacitation. So it helps to start capacitation. That capacitation again is when the spermatozoa can begin beating their flagella and become highly motile. The prostate gland produces 20 to 30% of the semen volume. The prostate is a small muscular organ. It's slightly acidic, and it contains the antibiotic called seminal plasmin. Seminal plasmin. I'm going to put that down here because I don't have area up there. Seminal plasmin. So this is a natural antibiotic. It helps prevent urinary tract infections in the male. Then there's also the bulbourethral gland. This is a gland that's a little more round-shaped. It's located at the base of the penis. It secretes a thick alkaline mucus. The mucus helps to neutralize the acids from the urine. The mucus also helps to lubricate the gland's penis, which is the tip of the penis, for easier penetration into the female's vaginal canal. So let's look at all the components of semen. We have the sperm count. So first we have spermatozoa. There are normally 20 to 100 million spermatozoa per milliliter of ejaculate. So when a male ejaculates, there will be in the semen 20 to 100 million sperm per milliliter normally. There will also be the seminal fluid, and the seminal fluid contains the fluid from the epididymis as well as the fluids from the seminal gland and the prostate gland and the bulbourethral gland. When the male ejaculates, the semen will travel into the penis. The penis is a tubular organ that conducts urine to the exterior, and it also conducts the semen to the exterior in the ejaculate. You'll want to take a look at the diagram of the penis and all these other glands in the textbook. I'm just going to go over some of the parts here. So in the penis has a root. The root is the fixed portion that attaches the penis to the body wall. Then it has a body. The body is the tubular, movable portion of the penis. And then it has the tip of the penis, which is called the glans. And the glans is the expanded distal end of the penis that surrounds the external urethral orifice. So the external urethral orifice is the opening to the outside. So you'll want to take a look at the picture so that you can see where all of those different parts are. Now, in the penis, there is erectile tissue. The erectile tissue has many vascular channels, and there's also elastic connective tissue and smooth muscle fibers. There are two types of erectile tissue. There's the corpora cavernosa, and there is the corpus spongiosum. The corpus cavernosa is on the anterior aspect of the flaccid penis. When the penis is not erect. And the corpus spongiosum surrounds the urethra. So the urethra in this part of the penis is called the spongy urethra. There's three parts to the urethra. The first part is called the prostatic urethra. And that's where the urethra goes through the prostate gland. Then there's the membranous urethra. That's the part of the urethra between the prostatic urethra and the spongy urethra. And then there's the spongy urethra. And the spongy urethra is in the penis. And then that ends at the external urethral orifice. So the parasympathetic nervous system releases a neurotransmitter called nitric oxide. Nitric oxide causes vasodilation of the arteries. So then blood rushes into the arteries in the penis, and this increased blood flow will cause an erection. We also need to know the prepuce. The prepuce is another name for the foreskin. This is a fold of skin that covers the glands of the penis. There's also glands that are on the inner surface of the prepuce, and they're called preputial glands. They secrete a substance called smegma. Smegma is a thick, white, kind of cheesy substance that collects under the foreskin of the penis. It is more common in uncircumcised men. It's normal to have some smegma, and it usually isn't a health problem, but bacteria can grow in it. All right, now let's look at some of the hormones of the male reproductive tract. So there is the anterior pituitary gland, and we also have the hypothalamus. So this is the anterior pituitary. Okay, and then there's also the testis down here. All right, so the anterior pituitary releases FSH and LH. They are controlled by a hormone in the hypothalamus that's called gonadotropic releasing hormone. So when gonadotropic releasing hormone is released from the hypothalamus, it's carried down to the anterior lobe of the pituitary, and it's going to cause the release of FSH and LH from the anterior lobe of the pituitary. In adult males, the gonadotropic releasing hormone is released in these small pulses. If the pulses increase in frequency, then so will the release of the hormones from the anterior lobe of the pituitary. So in an adult, the levels of FSH and LH and testosterone, which is coming from the testis, those plasma levels are going to remain within a narrow range throughout the entire male's life. So FSH in the male targets the sustentacular cells, which are the nurse cells. Under FSH stimulation, these cells are going to promote spermatogenesis. So they're going to cause spermatogenesis, as well as spermiogenesis. Luteinizing hormone will stimulate the secretion of testosterone and other androgens, but testosterone is the main androgen. Testosterone has several functions. It also stimulates spermatogenesis. It promotes the functional maturation of sperm. It affects central nervous system function, and by that I mean sex drive in the male and other related behaviors. It stimulates metabolism, especially of protein synthesis and muscle growth. Okay. It also establishes the secondary sex characteristics. So by that, what I mean is the males will develop hair on their face, under their armpits, in their genital areas. Their voice box, the cartilages in their voice box get thicker and their voice will get lower. The sebaceous glands will start secreting. Their fat deposits will be different than females. And there's other secondary sex characteristics. The other thing testosterone does is it maintains the accessory glands and the organs. Of the male reproductive tract. Testosterone production begins around the 7th week of development in the male baby, and it reaches a peak after about 6 months. This early surge of testosterone stimulates the differentiation of the male duct system and the accessory organs. So the fetus starts developing into a male. All right, so that ends this video on the male reproductive system, and the next time we pick up, we'll start looking at the female reproductive system.